Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Today, it's a chance to talk about smart cities. Now, would you like to live in a smarter city, an environment that is leveraging and utilizing tech for the benefit of all? Well, we're going to dive in and talk about that with Jonathan Reichental. Now, welcome to the show, Jonathan. Great to see you.
It's good to see you again, Paul. It's been a while. I've been on your show before, but it's been so long. And you've been on my podcast too, so it's lovely to reconnect with you.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we can't connect in person on this occasion, but it's not too bad doing it over the internet. It was definitely fun to catch up with you last time in Silicon Valley and Palo Alto. There, I think you were still in your role as the chief information officer at the city of Palo Alto when we last caught up in person. But tell us a little bit about what you've been up to. You've been on the New Zealand Tech Podcast before, but you're and sort of in between. You've spoken in I don't know how many dozen countries since that last appearance. You were here in New Zealand, speaking to chief information officers. I think probably at the CIO summit. Definitely keen to delve into smart cities, particularly in light of your new book that I hear has been selling incredibly well, which is Smart Cities for Dummies. So we're definitely gonna delve into that. But what have you been up to, and what's life in San Francisco and the Bay Area like during this sort of time of COVID madness?
Oh boy, madness is right. That's an understatement. I had 7 amazing years at the city of Palo Alto. I'm the last person that I thought would work in government, and then I thought I'd stay maybe 3 years, to make a difference. 1 year's too short. 2 years you're sort of getting warmed up, and then 3 years you can kind of get stuff done as a chief information officer. But I ended up staying for 7 years and had a good time there. But it was time for me to move on. The city manager was retiring after 35 years. He was one of the reasons not only that I joined the city, but I also stayed at the city. And we were a good partnership for experimenting with tech and delivering improved and new services to the community. So he was moving on, and I thought, I'm well past that CIO expiration date. I probably should think about my next thing. And I did think about a ton of options. One was to go to a big tech firm. I must have been crazy to think about that. Then I was going to go maybe full-time into academia, which I've been doing on the side for many years now. But actually I thought, let's do the Silicon Valley thing and try a startup. Who knows how long I'll be here, and I'm here right now, and I got my network and my connections, and I help lots of startups. Maybe it's time for me to try my own thing. And so in January of 2019, I spun up a little sort of education / tech boutique firm, and there's no product. It's almost, it is entirely services, but it's been pretty cool. I focus on a lot of education related things, everything from writing to content development to teaching, and some very successful online videos that I do. Do it both for big platforms like LinkedIn, but also for private companies who want it's very specialized tech training done for their employee base. I do traditional consulting, so I'm doing IT strategy stuff. Still working a lot with cities. That's where that's what I love to do now, both the education side and to focus on the future of our cities. And as you and I will speak about in a few minutes, it's a pretty big deal, our cities, and so it's a great, important topic to be involved in. And the last thing I'm doing is, and this is very characteristic of, where I'm at in my life here in Silicon Valley. So many of my cohorts are in the same position. We do a little investing in startups. Sometimes that investment is just time, and other times it's some cash. So we're all hoping for, if you have a portfolio, you're hoping that one will be a breakout hit, and that'll be your perhaps will be our retirement. But my startups are all social impact companies. So I'm investing to make a difference. And that aligns well with both my education passion and my interest in cities. Now, this year I had various plans for 2020, but of course, nature had different plans for you and I and everyone else. So, we've been in shelter in place here in San Francisco, just south of San Francisco. It sort of everything shut down towards the end of March, like it did for you, and it hasn't really opened up that well here. And so I've been writing and teaching and developing content and doing, I think, lots of productive things, and I'm doing well relative to a lot of people. But it's bad here. I mean, we really have a sort of a perfect storm of a pandemic that's not been managed. We have people who really believe it's a hoax. We have a lot of people who refuse to wear masks, and right now we're in the end game of a contentious election. That's just going to get worse in the days ahead. So it's a bit of a tough time. We're opening, closing. The hairdressers were open for a while. They're now closed. We really wanted to get kids back in school and students back to university, and that hasn't gone well at all. So it's a tough time. We got our protests going on. We got some very, very deep, systemic, institutional challenges that need to be addressed over the next few years in a really important way, and they're not. So all that said, every day here in Northern California, wake up, there's blue skies. And, I'm healthy and my family's healthy. There's a lot to be thankful for. But that's the 50,000 foot overview of me and America right now.
Yeah. Oh, well, it is crazy times wherever we look. But let's delve in a little bit to this smart cities topic. You've spent so much time, involved in, both in your role there for Palo Alto, which of course is one of the more well-known areas of Silicon Valley, and really the things that you've been writing about in your book and the things that you've been teaching about. So I guess first and foremost, why is there this sort of big drive for smart cities? What are the big sort of challenges that you see that technology and innovation can be involved in changing?
Yeah, well, look, the first sentence of my book is, this is a book about people. And I want to really kind of use that as sort of the springboard for talking about this topic. People immediately think, the topic of smart cities, we're probably going to talk about tech. And yes, we're going to talk about tech for sure, but there's something much bigger, right? In my view, based on my research and the work I've done with governments and cities all around the world, our future belongs to cities. The often used data point that many people know, but I'll just share it because it kind of sets the stage, is more people live in cities today than live outside of cities. And we're moving into cities at about 3 million people per week. Right. And the last sort of quick data point here is we're building city infrastructure at a rate of the size of New York City every month. And we're going to do that for the next 40 years. When you think about things like the climate emergency that we're in right now, if you think about healthcare and access to education and clean water and fresh air and career opportunities, it's all happening within cities. So if we're going to solve those things, if we're going to solve the climate crisis and the climate emergency, we're going to have to do it inside cities. So they're pretty important. And so the core thesis here is that our cities are really important. Our future belongs to cities, but they're not in good shape. That's like stating the absolute obvious, right?
It's so true though, and that growth rate, a new, effectively sort of New York every how often did you say?
Every month.
Every month, yeah. I mean, that's phenomenal, and
Yeah.
of course, down here in New Zealand, where we don't see a whole lot of growth and change, other than roads getting a bit slower and so on. Um, that sort of description is somewhat mind blowing, because New York, of course, has a bigger population than all of New Zealand. And so life here in many ways is a lot simpler. We've been fortunate, I think, in so many ways, during COVID, not to be as impacted as many parts of the world, and generally I think there's a pretty good feeling. But look, realistically, those bigger issues around climate change and homelessness and so on, these these sort of challenges aren't unique to one part of the world or another. And I'm a big believer that technology and innovative use of technology can really play an important role in addressing some of these ills, some of these issues in society. And as you rightly point out, these issues are mostly centered around our cities. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up some of those areas. I mean, this isn't just about the transition to cars that drive themselves, or maybe even the transition to non-carbon energy. All interesting and important developments. I mean, very important. But often for you sort of people day to day, walking to work or driving to work, and living their life, they're concerned about the cost of their home. They're concerned about if they're going to have a job. They see homelessness and mental illness. Cities have they're not short of these major challenges, and so it doesn't matter what we call it. Smart cities just seems to have stuck, right? It's just the term that's stuck. But what we're really talking about is, how do we build better cities that serve people better and just increase the quality of life? So we don't have this excessive homelessness or lack of inclusion for different parts of our society. So I wanted to write a book not only that was about tech and how we can apply the best of technology to create better communities, but how to address all of these issues and how to think differently about how we should operate our communities. So there is a big tech element. There's also a big element of just thinking differently. And that's the bigger, that's why the topic is so big, right?
Yeah. And look, and I think there's also a universal sort of nature of of the thinkings, the mindset, the application of technology to solve problems. When you look at it in one context, it can also inspire that thinking in other contexts. So not everybody listening to this is going to be, sitting in local government and have an opportunity or be in a technology company that is supplying local government. But everybody will, I think, find some interesting take homes. Because so many of us live in cities anyway, so we're very interested in, well, how can our cities be better? How can we solve some of those frustrations, some of those challenges, and whether those are sort of social ills or other things that are on our minds, traffic and so on. But it's that broader view of where one bit of innovation often begets and helps facilitate other innovation, and the more we can we can learn, the more that helps. And I think always these discussions come down to empathetic thinking and having empathy for all of those involved, and that's how we ultimately can solve these problems, because we've got empathy for all the different sort of stakeholders, and we're not just looking at it through a lens, right? A local mayor who runs a particular region or city. They really have to be in that position of not just looking at it from, well, what ticks one box, but it's really looking at it from all those perspectives. And I guess this is a lot of the thinking that you do, right, is encouraging that sort of broader view to step back and look at how to really achieve outcomes that are great for everybody involved.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's enormous frustration by city leaders because they are so determined to find solutions, and yet many of these things seem intractable. But part of the problem is we're taking sort of a 20th century mindset and applying it in the 21st century. And so what I try to do is, and I work with lots of different people who are, very smart on this topic, is we try to take a 21st century perspective. How can we leverage the value of data? How can we take the advantages of digital transformation and apply them in a city context? So perhaps we can deliver with more efficiency, with lower cost than we have historically. If you're going to have people answering the phone, that's going to be expensive, for every service in the city, particularly when we're in a time of either sort of flat revenue or perhaps because of COVID, many communities are going to see a drop in revenue. We got to think entirely different about how we're doing all this stuff. Now, this has been going on a while, by the way. Communities think that, if you pay some taxes, government's going to take care of everything, right? Well, that's nonsense today in the 21st century. We all have to collaborate. And when I say all, I'm talking about the private sector, the public sector, academia. I'm talking about the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, and community. And it's the ultimate sort of public-private partnership. There's also now more opportunity for the private sector to step up and just deliver solutions. We don't have to wait necessarily for the mayor to do something or the council to say, okay, this is a good idea. Or today it was interesting. The Federal Aviation Authority in the United States finally approved Amazon to deliver packages by drones. This is you would have heard it, but I bet you nobody else, because we're so super focused on other topics, that some of this are like really groundbreaking. These things are happening. And I'm not saying I'm some huge advocate for partial delivery by drones. I'm just saying it's coming and it's going to have consequences. And so this was not initiated by cities to make it easier to deliver medicine or something, or to be able to send supplies to a growing an aging population. This is entirely driven by the private sector. So there's many examples ultimately of where the private sector says, hey, you know what, we're fed up with, or not that they're just fed up, but we see a problem, let's step up and solve it. And fortunately now we have this growing gov tech, urban tech sector that's doing that. So when we talk about the future of cities and when we think about better communities, we're also talking about thinking differently, designing differently, and taking advantage of the best parts of tech.
Yeah. So when we break that down and delve into it, where are you seeing the most innovation on this front? What's got me kind of curious, I suppose, is there does seem to be this widespread interest in smart cities, and I guess it's quite natural. Any city wants to look good to those that live there. They want to attract others from other areas, and they deal with all many of the same sorts of challenges from a financial perspective. And I mean, we've seen COVID put a huge sort of financial load on cities, and I haven't seen a good breakdown of exactly why that's the case. Here in Auckland, where there's just financial shortfalls of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not into the billions. And I'm not sure exactly what it is that's causing Auckland to be so far out of pocket compared to normal scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
But when I look sort of around the world, where I hear about the most sort of interesting things, often it seems to be China. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily good or bad, but there are some aspects that probably fall in one direction, and some that we would feel fall in other directions. Now, I don't know how much time you've spent in China, but of course, when you've got a very sort of what would you say? A government that can make decisions and do what it likes without necessarily there being any support from the general public. They could go out and roll out technologies such as, well, let's drop a few million cameras into a city and so on. That said, of course, London has lots of cameras, as do most parts of the world. But
right.
What are the places that have been on your radar that have really done some of the best things? And what do you think of what is happening in parts of China?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me maybe just start with the China question first, and then I'll go back to the more broader picture. All I can say is what's been happening in China over the last 20 to 30 years is just absolutely phenomenal. The level of investment in infrastructure is off the charts. I mean, the data is clear on this. I'm going to mess this up, but it just gives your listeners a sense of it. They poured more concrete and built more infrastructure in like 10 years, compared to what the US did in about 200 years. So they caught up very, very fast, and now they're moving forward even more rapidly. So the thousands of miles of high-speed rail that they've laid down, the thousands and thousands of miles of fiber that they've put in place, and the cellular networks, the investment they're making in education to turn out lots of engineers and physicists and lots and lots of smart people. The investments they're making in other countries surrounding them, and also in Africa, to ensure future demand and future dependencies. It's remarkable. And as you said, they do it in their government is different. Their governance and their structure is entirely different to here in the US, where if we're going to build a road, we have to understand all the wildlife and the erosion and the environmental consequences. All good stuff, but it slows everything down, and it slows it down to the point of nothing's moving forward. Here in Silicon Valley, we have an absolutely out of control housing crisis. There's not enough housing. It might change now because of COVID, but we'll see what happens in the long term. People say there's no solution. There's no way to solve this problem. There absolutely is a way to solve the problem. Build more buildings and build them more high rises. But here's the thing: people don't want to do it. Nobody wants to change the quality of life we have or the look of their little quaint little Silicon Valley towns. That's the choices we're making. Not the same necessarily in other countries, and China, where they actually have too many homes, too much property as a consequence of overbuilding.
Yeah, there are some places where they've basically built cities, and there's maybe not quite entire cities, but there are areas that are, there's empty buildings sitting waiting for a population to arrive.
Sure, they call them the ghost cities. Yeah, and part of that is when you build, you drive economic growth, and so if you continue to build, you continue to feed this hungry beast and create above average GDP. We'll see what happens to China in the long term. They're positioned well for dominating this century, or a good chunk of it. And if they get some breakthroughs in artificial intelligence and quantum computing, all bets are off. Then everything is different. I think when you look around the world, there's a lot of good work being done to build better cities. there is a recognition that there's a recognition of the challenges, and there's a recognition that we have to be bolder in how we solve them. And the other dynamic is we're starting to see sort of the internet natives become the leaders, right? As sort of the millennials and in particular start to enter senior roles in organizations. They were born with the internet. They were born with tech and apps and smartphones. So one would expect, and this is what we're seeing, is that there is more of a tech-centric approach to solving problems, a better appreciation, for example, of the role of data. And, to get back to an earlier question you asked, which I didn't answer properly or fully, in terms of what can we do, we can start by taking advantage of the high volumes of data that cities have in order to make better decisions, to do better planning, to be able to create new solutions. That there's enormous opportunity in data. But you were looking for maybe some specifics. I mean, the ones that people will always cite, and I've been to these places, are Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. It does feel a little bit like flying into the future. I mean, the city is remarkable. It's got that sort of like new car smell, as a city. Singapore, it's small, dense, and well managed, and so it's not for everybody. The system is not for everybody, but if you are part of it, you won't see homelessness there really, because it's a priority that everyone gets a home and everybody has access to a home. They make education their number one national goal, and they've prospered because of that. You see some good work being done in some European cities. The work in Barcelona got particular attention because it had a few sort of big tech companies jump in and sort of make it a city, a flagship city for new tech, like Internet of Things and smart trash cans. So, you could deal with waste more effectively.
So how is that sort of played out? Are we really just at the very, very early phases of this what we would call a smart city? Obviously, there are some cities like Christchurch here in New Zealand, that in many ways are very new cities, because they've had an incident, and the case of Christchurch with the earthquakes, that's meant effectively rebuilding from scratch over the last decade. A city like Barcelona, I guess there's a pretty big population. There's a lot of infrastructure that's been around a long time, but where you've got that willingness, there's an opportunity to bring change. And of course, there are levels of things where there's constant change. Be it the rollout of fiber or starting to move into 5G. You talked about Internet of Things. There are definitely ongoing and constant opportunities, aren't there, in terms of changing and improving the infrastructure.
Lots of great points there. I have to say, on my last visit to New Zealand, and I'm not saying this because I'm talking to you on this podcast or anything, it's certainly one of my favorite places in the whole world. And I think I shared with you when I visited New Zealand for the very first time, but when we first met 2 years ago. And I travel a lot. I usually get to the airport and I'm like happy to go home. This was the first time in maybe my life when I sat in the terminal at the gate waiting for my flight. And I was like, I'd love to stay another 4 or 5 weeks. Like, I didn't want to leave. So I have great love for New Zealand. And as soon as the COVID nonsense is gone, I'm getting back there. But I did drive down to Christchurch on my last visit. And, it's one thing to sort of see the tragedy that happened, through video and news, nothing to be there and really understand the full extent of it and all. And what I noticed was, to your point, exactly right. They had the opportunity to rethink a big city, and who has that chance, right? to say, how, now that we get the second chance, unfortunately, how might we do it differently? And I did notice things like, for example, much more focus on spreading the city out more. So the boulevards were wider. There was more green space. If I'm not mistaken, they were in the final stages of some light rail. All good decisions. Those make a community. These are the things we've learned. These make communities better when people have access to high quality public transport. When there are more parks, it is better for mental states, so people are healthier in their minds. So, when I look across the world and I think of the breakthrough things that are happening, of course, sensors being placed for, water detection or for better, management of traffic. These are things that definitely jump out. But I'm also impressed with, for example, pedestrianization. How many cities are beginning to think about how can we give our cities, our urban infrastructure back to people rather than the decades we've had now, or the century we've had of cities for cars. Let's have cities for people. Let's define the future of cities as places that are built for humans and not for cars or other mechanical things. So you see like some really neat work being done in Mexico City and even in Times Square in New York, where they have permanently pedestrianized major thoroughfares. And you see what happens. Life emerges. People start to gather and to like, for example, if you go to Times Square now, well, not right now because it's not a good time, but when things are better, you'll see that there's people congregating to watch entertainment, to drink coffee together, to do things that were unimaginable, I should say, just a decade ago or so. So I think even these sort of like analog features are transforming our cities. And the one last thing I wanted to just say about this, because this has sort of been a little bit of a passion of mine over the last few months because of my research in this area, is the emergence of urban forests. This is really cool, is bringing trees back into our cities. There are so many positives to this. Everything from, reducing the heat of cities, and tree covering canopies do that, to making cities and streets look more beautiful, and on and on. There's this great movement to bringing, the trees back, and air quality is an obvious one, right? So you see, as I traveled around Europe, and even, for example, I was in Santiago, Chile, and the remarkably beautiful and modern city for sure, and a real emphasis on trees, having their streets have these gorgeous canopies of trees. So that it might be surprising to people listening about this topic of smart cities, and I'm talking about trees, but really that's some of the broad and almost unorthodox thinking that is required now to transform our communities.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And this there does seem to be that sort of constant move around the world, wherever you look, to better cater to public transport and walking, and there's a trade-off for those in vehicles, and it is quite interesting at the moment to get around Auckland city. We don't have the train infrastructure yet. That's that's coming in terms of in the central city, and being able to get from one end of it to another. It's pretty painful to drive around and so on, but we're in a state of transition, so I'm kind of curious how that will land. But it does seem to be very much a sort of a global move to make it easier for people to get around on bikes and on foot, compared to in cars. So yeah, I'm kind of curious how that will play out. I mean, I've certainly spent my fair time walking around cities like San Francisco and New York, and yeah, they're it can be a long hike from one place to another, and it does vary how good the infrastructure is in terms of subways and the like to sort of get you around. So cars are still a pretty important part of the mix. It's fair to say. When we look forward a little bit further, Jonathan, we're sort of, I guess, in this stage of sort of laying a lot of foundations for much more technological cities of the future. How do you see things playing out? For instance, one challenge that I'm sure has been common around the world in recent months has been connectivity for people wherever they are. Particularly those who are maybe not as wealthy. While schools are closed down, you've got families everywhere that are wanting their children to be successful, but
Mm-hmm.
in order to be able to take advantage of online learning, you need to be able to get online. Is this one aspect that you see that the smart city of the future has, as some sort of universal connectivity that's open to all, even if it's maybe a lighter grade than what we expect people maybe to have in terms of gigabit, 10 gigabit, plus fiber into every home? Is that one aspect of the smart city?
Yeah, yeah. I can't help thinking of when I was chatting to you when you were over in Palo Alto a while back, and you were telling me all about the New Zealand strategy to deploy fiber. I was very impressed, and you clearly have a couple of advantages. Not a huge population and not a massive country, so you have some characteristics there that help. But that all said, you still have to have leadership. You still have to have a vision, and apparently New Zealand got that, and hopefully that plan is rolling out as you expected. It's interesting. If you go back to 1850, let's do a little bit of urban history here. Electricity is the big thing that happens, and electricity absolutely changes the world. It enables telecommunications and railways and factories and air flight. And lots of things to suddenly happen and transform the world.
And it took a long time to arrive, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's my point. So this is 1850, right? And we start to electrify the world. It is now 2020, right? And we haven't finished that project yet. It's true. I mean, there's
mind-boggling, isn't it? I mean, I remember my father telling me about growing up in the UK. I don't know, an hour or so out of London, in the village that he was in, and he was telling me about listening to the wireless, and they had to go, they had to take their battery. There was somebody in the village that they would take this battery to get charged so that they could listen to the radio. And I'm thinking, hold on, this is the 1940s, and you didn't have electricity in your home. So and you're telling me, of course, that there are still parts of the world that are lacking that, and I guess there are parts of New Zealand and parts of the Pacific Islands and so on that are off grid too. But that is actually a bit of a wake up call. I think we forget some of these realities.
Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, they called the radio was called the wireless. By the way, so your father probably your relatives refer to as the wireless, and so you've got still somewhat a little less than 1 billion people today who don't have access to electricity in the seamless way we do. And so you fast forward, and we have the information technology revolution, and really starts in the 40s, and gets underway really in earnest in the 50s and the 60s. We get the internet, around about the 90s, starts to be available to all of us, and now it's 30 years later, and we're approaching about 60% of the world has access to the internet. So it's that's been rapid relative to other major infrastructure deployments. But at the same time, 40% of the world woke up or will wake up tomorrow morning with no access to the internet. So yes, it is still a huge infrastructure project. It's not equally distributed across the world. Of course, you have fantastic infrastructure in South Korea, but then you get into the rural areas of the United States, and they don't have access, or they have just dial-up still. And then I'm not even talking about parts of India and parts of Africa where there's no access whatsoever. So if we're going to be considered smart, if we're going to have the advantages of connected devices, of more digital services, you got to have a digital infrastructure. And the basics of a digital infrastructure is connectivity, is the internet, is copper, is fiber, is wireless, and the whole now spectrum of different short range and long range wireless capabilities. So yeah, for any mayor, any city leader, the creating leadership and a vision and eliciting the funds and having the partnership to bring faster infrastructure, I should say connectivity or telecommunications to its community, partnering with the right people, that needs to be a basic foundational part of any future city. If you don't have access to the internet, you cannot participate in the 21st century. I mean, and that applies to things like education and jobs and healthcare, basic stuff. So yeah, that's a foundational aspect for sure.
What are some of those other things that we've seen that are either reasonably new or coming in the next few years ahead in terms of what we would call the real smarts? You mentioned data before, and we've seen it here in New Zealand that our parking technology has ramped up in a reasonably short space of time, and we've got some innovative firms here that are involved in in selling some of that technology out to the world, and that creates a scenario where a city can know what percentage of car parks are in use, where are the car parks that are most congested, and be a lot more intelligent about, well, where should further car parks be built, where should we be making changes to roading, and there's so much data to draw on. And then I guess age-old issues of overflowing rubbish bins, we'd call them here in New Zealand. I guess you probably call them trash cans or something in the in America. But the idea, well, you can connect these things up. What are some of the other things that are going on that we can look forward to, or that are already going in other parts of the world, other than just cameras that spy on us and call down thunderbolts from Elon Musk's satellite or something.
Right. Well, there are kind of four. Maybe the way to think about this is my famous four buckets. Right. The first one is digitalization. There's still an awful lot of work to do to bring our cities up to even the lowest entry levels of the private sector. We're still filling out too many paper forms. It's quite remarkable. We're still faxing stuff. We're still having to go to an actual physical place and fill out a form and get it witnessed and stuff. So there's an enormous amount of opportunity in some of this easy stuff. It's worth a lot of money, by the way. It's to digitize government and cities is a tremendous opportunity, and there's lots of gaps. So if you're an entrepreneur or you're a young person thinking about what you want to do with your life for the next few years, there's a ton of opportunity to help with the digitalization of cities and governments. And so people can look forward to, hopefully, more seamless processes, more remote access, no necessity to go to a place. And for example, if you're going to get if you're going to do something in your home, like let's say you get a new kitchen, right? And this will be different in different places. But here in the US, you got to do inspections, electrical and plumbing inspections. You got to get certificates. I mean, you got to get a permit. There's all different types of steps and stages you got to go through to do something like to build a new kitchen. And it involves, quite a lot of going backwards and forwards to the permitting center, which every community has. A lot more of that should be able to be done on a smartphone, frankly. So I think community
would make a huge difference, wouldn't it? Because there seems to be these huge layers of bureaucracy just to do very sort of simple, maybe a simple change to to a home. And here in New Zealand, I think they've lightened up some of that regulation to try and help sort of stir spending in the economy. So people get a little bit more done. Now, I don't know whether that says that we didn't need those things in the first place, or whether it's just a little bit of a trade-off for a short period of time. But yeah, that seems like a really sort of smart move if you could move those things to digital. If you need to do, if a council or local government of some sort needs to inspect something, can't they do that over a remote video call rather than having to spend a whole lot of time, get from location A to location B? I mean, they could probably get twice as much done in the same amount of time, right?
Yeah, no question. And it's often repeated now. I mean, COVID-19 has brought more digitalization to government in 6 months than anything else in the last 10 years, or even 20 years. So it has accelerated some of those things. It's just we've had to do it. So there's been some. If we're an optimist like I am, the silver lining on some of this, this COVID nonsense and this horrible thing that's happened, is that we've seen some innovation happen that should have happened a long time ago. So the second category is going to be transportation. I think this is an area that we can see with our own eyes is being transformed, and it ranges from everything from many different forms of transport, everything from like a scooter to an e-bike to light rail that we see rolling out, to much more adoption of bicycles in general. I mean, this is a phenomenon all around the world. I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with the deputy mayor of Paris about I don't know 8 years ago, and he said that the use of bicycles was growing all over Europe. It had always been huge in the Netherlands and some other places, but in France and particularly in Paris, people didn't really cycle, and so they thought, well, there's a bit of a trend, let's try it. And there was a big argument, at City Hall that we'll roll out 1,000 of these bikes for people, and nobody will use them. The French will never use them, and well, they rolled out 1,000 bikes, and they were all absolutely used, and there wasn't enough bikes for all the demand, so they ended up a few months later adding another 2,000 or 3,000, and eventually it really caught on. And today, Paris, it's almost like you can't recognize it with the amount of cyclists. So bicycles have become a very big part of society, and the same thing's happening here in the U.S. America is often called the auto nation. People, the suburbs were built based on cars, and now bicycles are starting to take off. And the trouble is we've got these huge distances, and we don't have the infrastructure. So fortunately, we're seeing some good progress there. We'll also see autonomous vehicles. This is going to be a big impact to our future, the way we get around. It may also mean things like we won't own cars. And so what happens to a city when their car ownership disappears eventually? Well, it means like maybe we don't need parking lots, or we can convert some parking lots into hotels or housing, or retail, whatever it makes sense. Maybe retail is a bad idea now, because it's all pretty much going to go online, it seems.
Yeah.
So high speed rail, of course, will come to more places. Hyperloop is kind of interesting. I think it's still speculative, but there are some Hyperloop projects, and if they work, the ones that are being proposed, it could be it could ignite an Hyperloop revolution, or similar. Drones, we talked about that briefly earlier. Today you look up in the sky, it's blue sky, and you can see the birds and things. It could be within a few years that our main arteries in our cities are full of these flying drones in all sorts of directions.
They'll have to conquer the sort of the rain issue in Auckland, and the wind issue in Wellington, and a few other things like that to make them work all the time. But yeah, I mean, that's been something that's maybe been sort of quite a slow burn, hasn't it? But it does seem as though we will see some reasonable steps forward within just how electric flight technology can be applied to various things, whether it's those drone deliveries, or here in New Zealand we've got the development of the autonomous air taxis from Wisk, which of course is sort of a joint venture between US funders, including Boeing and so on, and the work here in New Zealand. So yeah, that's going to be quite interesting to see how it plays out. Do you have a sort of a sense of how quickly we would see that change? I mean, some things are much easier and much quicker to take place, aren't they? And I remember reading about bicycles coming into and how they've just changed transport. And I think bicycles have sort of, they've probably gained popularity around 150 years ago or so. But before that, it was walking, and suddenly, bicycles became something that that people could own and utilize. And the distance that people traveled, on average, increased, by quite a number of times because of bicycles. And now, of course, we have bikes you can just you don't need to own. There's that ability just to jump on and use them, and of course the electric aspect, and that's come from sort of nothing to being very, very common. Along with other forms of similar type of transport. And I saw some news. I think it was in the last 24 hours on I don't know what you would call them, but more the like an electric Vespa type bike, and that obviously even further in terms of range and higher performance than an e-bike. So yeah, you can imagine those things will keep moving along. The air movement for me is a little bit less certain in terms of how quickly that'll move, and even will it or will it not happen? Do we, are we comfortable flying around in the sky, and is the technology able to deliver, shall we say?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that we're going to see passenger drones be universally used anytime soon, and not because we can't, but because like the technology is there. We can definitely we already see drone taxis in limited use. It's the cost. The economics don't make it a something that can be widely used, at least not right now, and I don't see that for a long time. So that's more of a economic problem, moving humans in drones. But drones for package delivery and primarily, I think that's going to happen fast and big. Certainly what COVID has done is it's accelerated the demand for delivery. I mean, people are shifting from brick and mortar to online, and they were anyway, but COVID now has accelerated it, and people are getting their groceries and their meals all delivered now, and their medicine, and it'll become a war of who can deliver fastest. I mean, it was funny when we went from like overnight delivery, which seemed amazing, to same day delivery, which we thought, wow, that's so incredible, to now 1 hour delivery, which we thought, wow, that's pretty impressive. And now what Amazon are targeting with their Prime Air is 30-minute delivery. I'm laughing because I'm thinking about, there's a terrific comedian on Netflix, did a stand-up show, and I wish I could remember his name right now. And some people will know what I'm talking about. And he talks about this very notion of like the speed of delivery. It's like how he got more and more impressed. And he said eventually, like, it's 30 minutes and 15 minutes and 5 minutes. And then he said, everybody, it won't be competitive enough. They'll deliver before you even think of it. The package will arrive. You didn't even know you wanted it. It'll happen like 10 minutes before you even got your computer. It's like, it gets so ridiculous in terms of like compressing the time.
You think about the extreme uses of artificial intelligence, and maybe you can sign up. If you sign up for the top plan with Amazon, they'll always have something waiting for you based on what the AI thinks you might need next.
Huge.
Time of day and everything else. So I guess it's all possible.
Oh, it's totally possible. No, I mean, the reason, one of the areas that Amazon has totally figured out and is using AI on is when you have a baby. Because they know when you have a baby, if you start ordering baby stuff, they know there's a baby in your life. And once you're hooked on that, once you're getting things through Amazon delivered quickly that are related to a baby, you're hooked. You're in the ecosystem, and they know what you want when you want it. They know the age of your child and what the child's gonna need at every month of its life, probably through its entire life. So this is not some magical fiction we're talking about here. But your question was how fast, and I think about how quickly we went from we got our phones, our cell phones, went from pagers to phones. We suddenly got our smartphones and we had some apps and things. But text messaging here in the United States, for example, we didn't have it because the telco companies were not talking to each other, so you couldn't really have good texting.
I recall that it was very big in in New Zealand and
same thing.
Other places. I remember Singapore, where pages were very big, and we didn't really have that kind of phase in New Zealand to that degree, where it was kind of like everybody had a pager. Here we went to cell phones, and texting was a big part of it. But the US sort of got left out of that for many years, and sometimes there's these kind of odd artificial barriers, right, that hold things up, and then in other cases it all just flows through very quickly. And in the same way, I guess Spotify just moved in and suddenly became this sort of force in terms of how we consumed music, and the radio industry and others were impacted very quickly.
It's so true, so true. And well, yeah, I mean, Spotify is completely huge disruptor to the music industry. But then I would go, going back to the texting for a moment, I would go to Europe and all my friends were texting. And I was like, this was like crazy. Like when people were going to be late and stuff, they were all, and it seems so quaint now, but this is like all of 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And then I come back to the US and nobody was texting. We couldn't. We didn't have the technology to be interoperable between the different telcos. Well, it eventually happened. Obviously they had to negotiate. It was going to happen. And texting happened, what I would say, I would characterize as overnight. America went from nobody texting to everybody texting. So I feel a little bit like, there's the momentum around drones is building. Now FDA's approved. Amazon, they've also approved several others over the last few months. You look up at the sky, don't hear anything, I don't see anything. And before we know it, there's going to be a lot of traffic, a lot of drone traffic. By the way, there's going to be issues. People are not going to like the noise, and they're going to be worried about the safety issues and the privacy issues. There's lots of things to come out of that.
We have a great company here in New Zealand that's addressing the noise issue with some very smart things to keep them quiet. So very smart acoustics.
Oh, yeah, they're going to be popular. The other two quick areas in the short amount of time we have left is energy. Is the energy revolution. One is the energy revolution, and related to all of this is how cities are going to respond to the climate emergency. But let me just sort of talk just briefly about the energy revolution for a moment. This is something that's absolutely underway right now, and for a lot of us, it's sort of invisible. We don't have that great visibility into how our energy is derived and delivered to our houses. But there is a movement going on. There certainly is massive efforts to reduce the carbon energy that we produce in favor of non-carbon, particularly in terms of wind. Solar is in there, and hydro, and there's nuclear is part of the mix a little bit, and so we're not going to see any sudden elimination of carbon energy. We simply can't deliver at the right cost and the reliability we have today with the non-carbon options yet. But we can have a better mix. We can have more solar and more wind, and then less coal, less oil, less gas. And this means, as we go, for example, specifically towards something like solar, major infrastructure changes in our cities. You already see them. You see buildings with their their solar roofs. You see parking lots now having solar panels all over them. You even see homes that are able to power a good deal of their power. And in fact, in some places where they have a lot of sunny days, homeowners are able to even sell the energy back into the grid and in fact make some profit from it. So I think we have that to look forward to. I think it's a kind of a good news story that we're not really celebrating that much. We talk about how much new gigawatts of energy are placed onto the grids every year in our societies. And up until just a few years ago, the trajectory was continued to be, coal, oil, and gas. And gas has really had a bit of its own revolution too. Not great, because that's not fabulous for the environment. But simultaneously, we've seen this whilst oil, actually all three have dropped in terms of net new gigawatts of power being introduced. They're not going away, and they won't go away for many decades in terms of introducing new carbon-based energy. But we see this very steep and accelerated adoption of solar and wind and the others. And that's a good news story, because it's intuitively, here we have lower cost, abundant, clean energy if we can do it right. And it can help really in a big way with the climate emergency. So I think the why this all makes sense is, cities are the biggest consumers of energy. By the way, data centers are the largest in most developed countries in terms of consuming energy. So bring it back to tech for a second. But if we're going to, solve the climate emergency, we have to do it in cities, and with cities producing, the most amount of energy and requiring the most amount of energy, we're going to be seeing this transition, which will have all these positive impacts over time. So I think that's a very visible, big thing to look forward to.
Well, there really is so much we could delve into, Jonathan. And I could see we've burned through about an hour already, and we could probably burn through another one or two of these sort of different directions we could go. But look, it's been absolutely fascinating chatting with you. Always great to catch up. Whether it's in person or across the airwaves like this. Now, tell us where people can track down smart cities for dummies, and
yes.
What they should or where they should look to find you and to follow you on social media.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to share that. So yeah, the Smart Cities for Dummies book, it's part of the Dummies series from Wiley. It's out now about 6 weeks. It's a blockbuster. I'm so humbled and just totally, it's been amazing to see the enthusiasm and the interest in this book. So it's moving big time all over the world. I've had and I've sent and I've had requests from everywhere, from Iran, from Japan, Korea, a lot from South America, from New Zealand, of course, Australia. So it's really terrific. People are interested in the communities and in the cities. They want to make a difference. They want to know what the tools are. This book, whilst it is part of the Dummy series, many people have told me it doesn't really feel like a sort of a dumbed down book. It feels like a comprehensive guide for anyone who wants to make a difference, anyone who wants to participate in their city, whether you work for the city or you're a community member or you're a vendor or you're in academia. I wrote it for everyone, and I didn't write it down to anyone. I wrote it, respecting people's intelligence and giving lots of examples and lots of how-tos. So I do want people to, if they were in any way intrigued by our conversation today, to know that this is a good little investment if they want to pick up the book. It is available, of course, on Amazon. It's in Bookatopia, which I believe is popular in Australia and New Zealand. Yeah, as an online service. So hopefully,
I haven't. That's not one I've used, but we've certainly got plenty of choices, haven't we? Which is great. Have you got a audio book coming out as well?
Well, there is talk of that right now. Dummy's book is not ideal for an audiobook because it's a how-to guide, and there is some diagrams and things like that. And but there looks like there may be sufficient interest in it. There is an ebook, of course, so it is both physical form, and you can get the ebook right now, straight away onto your e-reader, whatever it is. That's absolutely available. And we'll see what happens with the audio. We're looking at a Spanish edition soon, and also potentially a German edition. So I'm hoping to get the Spanish. Hoping that there's a Spanish edition by the end of the year. Not that that's terribly interesting for a New Zealand audience, but you may have Spanish-speaking people
from all over the world here in New Zealand.
That's true. That's true.
Absolutely. Oh, that's great. Well, yeah, really, really good to catch up. Now, if people wanting to follow you on Twitter, that's sort of your main social media channel?
Yeah, I'm pretty active there. So it's just my last name, at Reichental, Reichhental. So definitely easy to find Jonathan Reichental on Twitter. I'm very active on LinkedIn, as you know. So happy to have conversations and explore ideas with people on LinkedIn. So I think between Twitter and LinkedIn, you can get me, you can ask questions, we can connect. So and if you want to just kind of see what I'm, kind of hear my musings on different topics and read my articles, I link everything. I put everything on Twitter there and on LinkedIn as well, so people can easily find them. I do have a professional site on Facebook, just Dr. Jonathan Reichental on Facebook. So that's another. If Facebook is your thing, I'm there too.
Yeah, that's great. Well, look, thanks, Jonathan, for joining us on the show today. And also, of course, a huge thank you to all of you for listening in. It's our listeners that make the is the reason why we do this. And also a massive thanks to our show partners, who of course are able to help us keep the New Zealand Tech Podcast going and support our production and so on. So big thank you to Sumo Logic there, Silicon Valley company who support us here in New Zealand, to Vodafone New Zealand, Spark New Zealand, HP, Samsung, Umbrella Connect, Gorilla, and of course Focus. So huge thank you to those companies for their support of the tech and innovation ecosystems here in New Zealand. And of course you can track us down online across those same social channels, in terms of LinkedIn, especially Twitter and Facebook. Those are all good places to find the New Zealand Tech Podcast. So thanks everybody for listening in to this week's episode. Of course, we'll be back again next week. And if this is your first time, well, make sure you subscribe. Find a good podcast app on your device and subscribe. And we will catch you again on the next episode. All right, thanks everyone. See ya.